Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this week's Incident Management Cafe. And I have my co-host, Robert Crum on. Hi, Bob. How's it going?
Good. Hi, Cam. How you doing?
Doing good. So today, I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about MSPs, service desk optimization, things of that capacity. But one of the things that we hear quite frequently, and one the core items that I wanted to touch on, was around organizational silos and informational silos, and how that can potentially affect managed service providers and service desk operations as a whole. So I guess from your prior experience in IT as a whole, Bob, what are some of the detriments that are associated with organizational silos?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's the classic left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So when there's a lack of knowledge sharing, um, it takes longer to get things done. It can get
Mhm.
frustrating. It can, it can maybe further aggravate uh, the lack of relationships
Mhm.
between different teams and so forth. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And just kind of on your first point there, where it takes longer to get things done, a lot of the times it might not be because no one's doing anything, but everyone is doing too much, right? Like you said, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, so the left hand's doing it at the same time as the right hand. Whenever an issue arises and there's not a viable channel of communication that spans the entire operation, then you don't know who's doing what. And oftentimes, everyone freaks out and the exact same thing gets done more than one time. And I think that that's very heavily displayed in this whole notion of tribal knowledge, right? That when one person has solved a particular ticket warranting some level of a reaction, 6 months later, the exact same issue arises. However, the mechanism for how to resolve it is not at all clear. So the next service desk technician that's assigned that is now responsible for doing it from the start, right? So kind of one, capturing root cause analysis post-mortem steps to identify and respond to an incident, but then two, to actually make use of that information needs to be shared, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That can also sometimes cause dissatisfaction, right, with employees. Can you talk a little bit about what your research has shown you there?
Yeah, 100%. So from an employee standpoint, one of our partners, ConnectWise, has quite a bit of information around managed services and informational silos in managed service providers. And one of the most important and pretty interesting stats that they had presented was that the cost of losing an employee in the first year is roughly 1 to 3 times that employee's salary in terms of value to the organization. And then training for new employees on the low end is roughly $10,000. So making sure that a service desk technician and on-call engineer feels satisfied in their ability to manage a service desk and their ability to handle tickets without needing to jump through hoops to kind of gather the specific information as well as the information that other service desk technicians may have is fairly critical there.
Yeah, and so again, you want everybody working together, right, to prevent that. And we talk about data collection, right,
Mhm.
sharing the data. So it should be in a centralized place where people can find it when they need it.
Mhm. 100%. And I think that that single place, a lot of the times when we talk about that, it starts to scare off organizations because they think that they're going to have to build in an entire new knowledge base tool or a document repository tool. And it doesn't need to be that complex. Yes, it can be in the case that you have a dispersed and rather complex organization. But ultimately, the process can be as simple as once a service ticket is logged, a document created with the steps outlined as to how it was resolved and stored in a central location with something that is simple as a naming convention would make searchable, right? Just any indication or any repository that consistently stores information across any service desk incidents and tickets so that they can be referenced later on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't need to buy new tools. It's really about process and training, consistency. So, first you have the process in place, like you said, generate the document and store it somewhere. I mean, you could use current systems like SharePoint or whatever, cloud hosted things, and in today's remote working environment, you need it to be available from anywhere and quickly. So it's very easily done. And sometimes it's a matter of just a lot of tools today can talk to one another. Modern tools are capable of doing that. But again, if all you need is a link to a document stored in your app, that gets it done.
100%, right? It doesn't need to be this expansive effort. There just needs to be an audit trail of what actually happened and how it happened, right? And like you said, it doesn't necessarily need to involve adding a new tool. It's really just process. And I think that there was an interesting report by ISG in terms of enterprise service management that they were essentially dictating that most enterprise organizations were attempting to make removing of any organizational silos a critical process in the scope of the 2022 year. Now, with that said, it's not just enterprises, it's everyone, as we've discussed. And it's really just a concerted effort to say that this process needs to be prioritized as part of our day-to-day operations so that when the time does come, we can avoid service desk inefficiency, we can avoid redundant work. And I am a big fan of this terminology that ConnectWise has kind of coined, silos of chaos, because that's really what they are, right? We hear informational silos, we hear organizational silos all the time, but what happens because of those silos? Chaos, right? Chaos ensues. And I think that a good way to avoid these silos of chaos are kind of instilling these process improvements as a priority to the organization.
And I think your point about staying on top of this, right, and putting a focus on eliminating silos, uh, sometimes they're unavoidable. I mean, think about expansion, acquisition,
Mhm.
right? So so businesses that are expanding and expanding by acquiring other businesses and so forth, merging those in, they're constantly battling with this kind of thing. So again, it's sort of it can be a continual process, but one that should not be ignored because it can really yield tremendous results in ROI when it's done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that from a ticketing or service desk perspective, I don't think I've really witnessed a single operation that doesn't track time spent on tickets. In the same way that time is spent on tickets, what happens throughout the course of that ticket and where that information is logged should be a procedure prior to the ticket that can even be closed, right? And I think that being able to do that, that time entry, you'll start to see go down tremendously as a byproduct of not needing to do work that has been done in the past or not needing to research or identify the scope or cause of certain issues that are previously otherwise documented.
Yeah,
And I guess the one concern, which I know that we have talked in depth about this in the past, that we've heard as far as removing informational silos is security. And from a security perspective, I personally believe that as long as the kind of principle of least privilege is followed, but followed to an extent that still allows individuals to review data that they're otherwise responsible for or would need to leverage, it shouldn't be an issue. But from your experience, have you noticed removing informational silos becoming a threat to security in any capacity?
no, not really, because again, you follow the security principles, right? Defense in layers, least privilege, all those processes. It doesn't matter, and oftentimes they're probably already in place so as to ensure that. I mean, it's sort of information is available on a need to know basis to maybe some of those other departments. It doesn't have to be a real risk.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. So that definitely makes sense, and I think that if anything is a core takeaway from this kind of session, that organizations really should be able to follow a process that either one creates a repository or two, at bare minimum, has a step in their service desk and ticketing process that involves documenting exactly where and how an incident was resolved. Thank you everyone
Absolutely.
for checking out this week's Incident Management Cafe, and catch you on the next one.